It's been almost 10 years now since Timothy Pitzen went missing. He was last seen with his mother before she took her own life and left a note saying that Timothy would never be found. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Lauren Elizabeth. On this channel I share stories about true crime, missing people, and unsolved cases. I don't mean any disrespect in doing so, but I believe it's important to share these cases in order to raise awareness, keep these stories alive, and work toward bringing missing people home or finding justice for victims wherever possible. If you'd like to see that type of content, please subscribe to this channel. Today we are talking about the case of Timothy Pitzen, who has been missing since 2011 when he was 6 years old. Now, I feel like Timothy's case is one that's a little bit more well-known. If you're into true crime, there's a good chance you've heard of Timothy's story before. It's one I've personally known for a while, and one that has always stuck with me. Timothy James Pitzen was born on October 18th of 2004. He's the only child to James Pitzen and Amy Fry-Pitzen. Unlike most other Timothys in the world, Timothy Pitzen's name was spelt with 2 M's, a choice his parents made because they knew he was unique and they wanted him to feel special. Timothy was a bright, happy, and outgoing kid. He was described as being a natural leader. He was adventurous, he loved riding his bike, go-karts. His favorite foods were Chuck E. Cheese pizza, mac and cheese, or anything from McDonald's. He was your average, happy, fun-loving little boy who was adored by everybody who knew him. Timothy's mother, Amy Marie Joan Fry, was born on May 3rd of 1968. She grew up in Libertyville and would later graduate from Iowa State University. Amy had unfortunately dealt with mental illness and depression for most of her life, and she had survived suicide attempts in the past. Jim Pitzen was Amy's 4th marriage, and Timothy was her only child, and by all accounts, Amy was a loving and adoring mother. Timothy meant the absolute world to Amy. And while her little bundle of joy brought light into her life, he did not cure her depression, because depression isn't something that's an easy fix. It's something that people have to continually work toward battling. In May of 2011, Timothy Pitzen was 6 years old and attending kindergarten at Greenman Elementary. His father, Jim Pitzen, had dropped him off for school that morning, assuming his son would have a good day at school and that he would see him later. But that would be the last time Jim Pitzen would see his son.
I said, "Love you, buddy," and he goes, "Love you too, Dad, and I'll see you later." I'm like, okay.
Later that day, Jim Pitzen returns to the school to pick up his son, and is very surprised to learn that Timothy had already been picked up at around 8:30 that morning by his mother, Amy. Jim is, of course, confused and worried and begins calling Amy's cell phone repeatedly and is unable to get a hold of her. Jim also tries contacting Amy's parents to see if they had seen her or talked to her, but they had not. Meanwhile, while Jim Pitzen is frantically trying to locate his wife and son, Amy and Timothy have set off on a fun-filled adventure. Amy picked Timothy up from the school at 8:30 that morning, citing a family emergency. In reality, there was no family emergency. After taking him out of school, Amy then brought her SUV to a repair shop, and an employee of this repair shop actually drove Amy and Timothy to the Brookfield Zoo. Now, the Brookfield Zoo was about a 40-minute drive from where Amy and Timothy lived in Aurora, Illinois, so I'm pretty sure this auto repair shop was also somewhere in the vicinity of the zoo. But after spending the day at the zoo, Amy and Timothy arrived back at this auto repair shop around 3 p.m. They then set off to their next destination, the Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee, Illinois, which would be about an hour's drive away. This resort had a pool and a water park and was definitely a very fun place for any 6-year-old. Meanwhile, Jim Pitzen has been at home, freaking out and repeatedly trying to get a hold of Amy and find out where she and Timothy are. After failing to get in contact with Amy, Jim Pitzen would call the police and report Timothy and Amy as missing on the evening of May 11th. Amy and Timothy spent the night at the Key Lime Cove Resort. The next morning, on May 12th, they would hit the road again, this time driving for another 2 hours across state lines to the Kalahari Resort Dells in Wisconsin. Receipts show that on their way, Amy stopped at a Shopko to buy clothing and toys for Timothy, and then stopped again at a Quick Trip in Johnson Creek to buy gas and soft drinks. The Kalahari Resort is another resort that any 6-year-old would have loved, with a water park, a theme park, bowling alleys, and a cinema. But the two would not stay there long, and sometime the next morning, they would check out of the Kalahari Resort. On the way to their next destination, Amy finally did call some family members. However, her husband, Jim Pitzen, was not one of them. Amy made phone calls to both her mother, Alana Anderson, as well as her brother-in-law, or Jim's brother, Charles Pitzen. In Amy's call to her mother, she told her that she and Timothy were both fine, and that she just needed some time to clear her head and think things through before her and Timothy came home. The call to her brother-in-law, Charles Pitzen, consisted of much of the same, saying that her and Timothy were fine and she just needed to think things over. However, this call also included a strange comment from Amy saying that Timothy belongs to her. This was a comment that struck everybody as odd and a little bit unsettling. Timothy was also heard talking in the background of this phone call, saying that he was hungry, but Charles said that he sounded like a normal, happy Timothy. Amy would end up traveling back into Illinois to a small town called Winnebago. However, by the time she got there, she no longer had Timothy with her. Amy was apparently seen at a Family Dollar in Winnebago by herself at around 7:25 p.m. Then, about an hour later, Amy is seen on surveillance footage at a Sullivan Foods grocery store in Winnebago, once again without Timothy. A few hours later, sometime between 11:15 and 11:30 p.m., Amy would go to Rockford, a town neighboring to Winnebago, and she would check in by herself at the Rockford Inn. At some point within the hours following, Amy Fry-Pitzen would take her own life. Amy used a blade to slash both her wrists and her neck, as well as taking an overdose of antihistamines. The following day, on May 14th of 2011, around 12 p.m., staff at the Rockford Inn discovered Amy's body, along with a suicide note. Amy had also left 2 other notes, one addressed to her friend and one addressed to her mother. Amy was 43 years old at the time of her death. The note that Amy left apologized for the mess that she had made, and said that Timothy was safe and in the care of people who loved him. However, the note said that Timothy would never be found. After Amy was found dead, authorities broke the heartbreaking news to Jim Pitzen and quickly began searching for Timothy. There were also a handful of items that were found to be missing from Amy's SUV. These included Amy's cell phone, all of Timothy's clothing and his toys, his Spider-Man backpack, a tube of Crest toothpaste, the clothing that Amy had been wearing when she checked out of the Kalahari Resort, and an iPass transponder, which from what I can tell is just a little device that you keep in your car, and it makes it easier for you if you use toll lanes or toll roads. Authorities also initially thought that Timothy's car seat was among the missing items, but it was later discovered that his grandmother had had the car seat from when she was babysitting him a few days earlier. Apparently, authorities were confident that Amy had dropped Timothy off in the care of someone else because of this missing car seat. However, once it was found to be with Timothy's grandmother, they began to doubt this. So I feel like at this point, everything might be a little bit confusing or hard to keep track of, so I just want to summarize a little bit. So Amy took Timothy out of school early in the morning of May 11th. They would then travel an hour away to the Brookfield Zoo. After spending the day there, they would head to the Key Lime Cove Resort another hour away and spend the night there. The next morning, they would travel again, this time across state lines, to the Kalahari Resort. And we know that they stopped at a Shopko to buy clothing and toys on the way to the Kalahari Resort. After their night's stay at the resort in Wisconsin, Amy would end up in Winnebago, Illinois, and later in Rockford, Illinois, where she would take her own life. And at some point between them checking out of the Kalahari Resort and when Amy was seen alone in Winnebago, something happened to Timothy. The note that Amy left implies Timothy is safe and alive somewhere out there. However, a lot of others believe that Timothy is dead and Amy killed him before she went to Rockford to end her own life. There's a lot of debate about that, and we'll get into that, but either way, something happened to Timothy between the hours of them checking out of the Kalahari Resort and when Amy arrived in Winnebago. It's also very worth mentioning that Amy seemed to take a very strange route from the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin to where she would end up taking her life. Remember, Amy had made those 2 calls on May 13th, one to her brother and one to her mother-in-law. Authorities were able to tell that these calls pinged off a tower in Sterling, Illinois, and if Amy were to drive a straight shot from the Kalahari Resort to Winnebago, she wouldn't have needed to be anywhere near Sterling. So it seems obvious that it was in this area near Sterling that something happened to Timothy. Quickly into their investigation, authorities discovered a trace amount of Timothy's blood in the back seat of Amy's SUV. This seemed like a really promising lead at first. However, the Pitzen family said that this had come from a severe nosebleed Timothy had had a few weeks earlier. The blood that was found in Amy's hotel room and on the blade that she'd used was also tested, and only her own blood was found. Amy's SUV was also said to have been noticeably dirty. Authorities analyzed the dirt from the undercarriage of the car as well as the tires, and through forensics they were able to discern a crazy amount of information about where the vehicle had been. They determined that it had stopped for some time on a gravel area near an asphalt road, and more specifically a road that had been treated with glass road marking beads. The SUV had backed into a grassy meadow or a field at some point. This meadow would have contained black mustard plants as well as Queen Anne's lace. And the area where the car was did not have trees. There may have been some oak or birch trees in the general area, but not in the direct place where the SUV had been stopped. They also said it was possible that there was a pond or a stream nearby, and said that there was no indication that the land was ever cultivated as either a lawn or for growing crops. And that is both so insane but amazing that they were able to tell so much information just from looking at the crud and dirt underneath Amy's SUV. The authorities think this meadow or field that the vehicle was stopped in is likely located in Lee County or Whiteside County in Illinois. They are also considering several other counties in the general area. I'll show a map marking all the areas where they suspect this meadow could be, as well as the location where Amy's cell phone pinged when she made those phone calls on the 13th. Well, the biggest question on everybody's mind is, of course, where is Timothy? Another big question everyone's wondering is why? Why would Amy do all of this? As I mentioned before, Amy had dealt with mental illness and depression for a long time. She had survived suicide attempts in the past, as well as being in therapy and treatment in the past. In addition to that, Amy was also apparently having some marital issues with Jim Pitzen, which a lot of people believe to have been a big contributing factor to what ended up happening. According to Jim Pitzen, he and Amy had gotten into an argument a while earlier because he found out that Amy was in contact with an ex-husband of hers, and Jim was upset about it, and I don't think anybody could really blame him. They were arguing over this, and things became heated, and Jim basically implied that Amy could do whatever she wants, but he was going to take Timothy. I think Amy had herself mentioned to a few friends wanting a divorce, and while Amy had been divorced before, this would have been her first experience dealing with custody. According to friends, Amy was terrified that she wouldn't be able to get custody with Timothy because of her previous issues with mental health. To Amy, Timothy was her entire world, and to her, losing custody of him was unimaginable. Amy was already in a somewhat fragile state of mind, and when Jim implied that he would take Timothy in an argument, I think in Amy's mind it seemed like her worst fears were becoming reality. It's believed that Amy was panicked, terrified at the thought of losing Timothy, and so angry with Jim for putting her in this place and saying that he was going to take Timothy. Amy thought that she would never be able to get custody of her son, and decided that if she couldn't have him, she certainly didn't want Jim to have him. During their investigation, authorities found a secret email account that Amy had made years prior and hidden from her husband. This seemed really promising at first, but after poring through all the emails in the account, they didn't find anything that was useful to the investigation. Authorities were also able to find out using toll records that in February and March of 2011, Amy had made unexplained trips out to the same areas that she would later go with Timothy. Extensive search efforts continued for Timothy, with no substantial leads being found for a while. 2 years later, in the fall of 2013, Amy's missing cell phone was turned in. It had been found in 2011 in a ditch alongside Route 78 in Illinois. The woman who had found it didn't think much of it, and it had been sitting on a shelf in her basement for 2 years. When she turned it on one day, she recognized the names in the phone, at which point she handed it over to authorities. This seemed like a really promising lead, but as far as I can tell, there was no substantial information found on this cell phone. So as I said earlier, there was a suicide note found with Amy in the hotel room, as well as one addressed to her mother and another addressed to her friend. All of the notes said much of the same, saying that Timothy was safe and well cared for, and that he would never be found. Her note to her mother also said that there was nothing anybody could have said or done to change her mind.
So I've taken him somewhere safe. He will be well cared for, and he says that he loves you. Please know that there is nothing you could have said or done that would have changed my mind.
The cryptic notes left by Amy imply that Timothy is safe and alive and that he's out there somewhere, and this is what the Pitzen family firmly believes. Amy was a loving and devoted mother who loved Timothy with all her heart, and the family is adamant that she would never or could never have hurt Timothy. There is other evidence to back up the theory that Timothy is alive. With Amy's secret trips out to the same areas months earlier, a lot of people believe she was going out there in order to meet someone and make arrangements to pass Timothy off. It's also supported by the fact that Amy stopped to buy all new clothing and toys for Timothy on their way to the Kalahari resort. A lot of people also believe the meadow or field where her SUV was believed to have been stopped could have been the place where she handed off Timothy to whoever ended up taking him. According to Jim Pitzen, multiple psychologists have told him that if Amy was going to kill Timothy, she would have killed Timothy and killed herself in the same room. Apparently, usually when parents kill their children and then themselves, they want to be with the child and thus would not bury the child and kill themselves elsewhere. However, certainly not everybody agrees with this theory. As awful as it is, we know that there have been parents who kill their children. Even in cases of parents who undoubtedly love their children, they still commit this horrible act because in that time, in that moment, in their broken frame of mind, they believe it's what's best. Many people believe that Amy killed Timothy, buried his remains somewhere before traveling to Rockford to end her own life. People believe that Amy would have wanted to bury all of Timothy's clothing and toys with him, which is why they were missing. An outfit of Amy's, the outfit she had been wearing when they checked out of the Kalahari resort, was also found to be missing. People believe this is because she likely got Timothy's blood on this clothing and buried it along with his remains. A lot of people also believe that Amy's note saying that Timothy is safe and with people who love him is actually Amy referring to heaven. People think Amy took Timothy out to all these fun places and bought him new toys and clothes as sort of a last hurrah, and as a way of her apologizing to him for what she knew she was going to do. And as for why Amy would want to bury Timothy elsewhere and then drive to Rockford to end her own life, a lot of people believe that this was because she was so angry with Jim that she just wanted to spite him and wanted to make sure he never got the closure of finding his son. But could she have really been so mad at Jim Pitzen that it would cause her to do something so awful and to harm a son that she loved more than anything in the world? As I've said, the Pitzen family firmly believes that Amy did not harm Timothy. They believe she did give him to someone, and that he's alive out there somewhere, with probably no idea that he's Timothy Pitzen. But if Amy really did give Timothy to somebody else, it raises a lot of questions. Firstly, Amy was a loving and caring mother, so surely if she was going to give Timothy to somebody else, she would have to make sure that it's a person she could trust and be very sure they would take good care of Timothy. However, this person couldn't have been someone she knew very long if this person wasn't known to anybody else in the family, and if the trips she made months prior were her arranging for them to take Timothy. Where did she meet these people? Why did she have reason to put so much trust in these people? And why on earth were these people willing to take her son, raise him, and lie to everybody about his identity? A lot of people think Amy perhaps lied to someone, maybe telling them that she was running away from an abusive situation and they needed to hide Timothy under a new name in order for him to hide from an abusive father. But anyone who would later see Jim Pitzen on TV talking about his missing son, they would see that that clearly isn't true and that he's a loving father who is heartbroken and just wants his son to come home. A lot of people also think that Timothy may have been taken to an Amish community, and once again that Amy told some sort of lie to them saying that Timothy was in danger and needed to be hidden. However, I'm unsure if Amish communities usually just take in random children that are brought to them. Also, Timothy Pitzen was 6 years old. In my opinion, I think that would be old enough for him to well remember his family, his parents, and his home, and surely he would be talking about this and asking about this. Jim Pitzen said that Timothy knew his full name and they had taught him how to call 911 whenever he was in an emergency. Timothy also had a children's ID card, however this ID card was found in the hotel room with Amy. The family believes that Amy must have told Timothy some sort of lie to scare him from ever speaking out, and that he has since probably forgotten about it, forgotten who he is, and is just living his new life. Last year, in April of 2019, there was briefly some new hope for the case. A boy in Kentucky came forward claiming that he was Timothy Pitzen, and that he had just escaped captors who had held him for 8 years. However, authorities were quickly able to use DNA to figure out that this person was not Timothy Pitzen. He was actually a 24-year-old man named Brian Reaney, who had heard about Timothy Pitzen's case on TV and for some sick and twisted reason decided that he would pretend to be him. I don't know if Brian Reaney actually thought he was going to be able to live the rest of his life as Timothy Pitzen, or if he just wanted to try and hurt the family, or maybe he just wanted attention, but whatever the reason was, it's absolutely heartbreaking and disgusting that he would pretend to be a missing child. Brian Reaney was charged with aggravated identity theft as well as lying to the FBI. In January of 2020, he was apparently able to come to some sort of plea agreement, however I don't know the details of this agreement or what sort of sentence he received. The Pitzen family was of course extremely hurt by this. They had to relive Timothy's disappearance all over again, and it gave them false hope, only for them to find out that it was just some creep pretending to be Timothy. However, the family did say they think there is some good that came out of the hoax because it put Timothy's name back into the public eye where it hadn't been for a while. Now it's been almost 10 years since Timothy's disappearance. His family still firmly believes that he's alive out there somewhere, not knowing or remembering who he is. I personally, as I mentioned before, am extremely conflicted about what I think. I of course hope that Timothy is still out there, and I want to believe that he is. There is some evidence that makes me think he is. The fact that all his clothing and belongings were missing, even including a tube of Crest toothpaste. I could understand if Amy had killed him and wanted to bury his toys and clothes with him for sentimental value, but why a tube of toothpaste? To me, that implies that someone is using that toothpaste. And with Amy making multiple trips out to the area previously could indicate that she was making arrangements with someone for them to take Timothy. However, this could also indicate that she was scouting out areas where she could potentially bury his remains. I 100% do believe that Amy loved her son with all her heart. However, as tragic as it is, we know parents will kill their children sometimes, even when they do love them, if they are dealing with severe mental illness and not thinking in a right state of mind. The authorities did not find any forensic evidence that proved any harm ever came to Timothy. There was a small trace of his blood found in the back seat of the SUV, however, this was determined to have been from a nosebleed weeks earlier. But if she handed him off to somebody else, who would possibly agree to take a 6-year-old, raise him, and change his identity so his mother could go off and end her life? Of course, if somebody else did take Timothy, it's likely that Amy would have lied to them about the situation, and it's likely that they wouldn't have known what she was going to do. But what kind of lies would convince someone to take a 6-year-old and raise him under a new identity? As much as I really want to believe that Timothy is alive and out there somewhere, I think I lean toward believing that he was killed by his mother before she took her own life. People have apparently said that parents who kill themselves along with their children don't usually do this in separate locations. However, taking into account that Amy was so angry with Jim, it's very possible that she was so angry, she wanted to spite him, and she wanted to make sure he wouldn't even get the closure of finding his son's remains. And if she did bury him somewhere, it would of course be likely that she would want to bury his things along with him. Also, the fact that Amy's clothing that she had worn when checking out of the Kalahari resort was also missing, to me really indicates there was likely Timothy's blood on this clothing and was buried along with him. This could also explain why Amy's SUV was so dirty and believed to have been in a field or meadow at some point. This could have been the area where she ended up burying Timothy. Ultimately, I'm not 100% sure what I believe. I think I lean toward believing that Timothy was killed. However, I do still have a nagging feeling that he could be alive and out there somewhere. It's certainly possible, and I definitely hope that he is alive and out there somewhere. If Timothy is alive, he'll be 16 years old now. The most recent age progression photo shows what Timothy may have looked like at age 14. The Pitzen family firmly believes he's alive and holds out hope for his return. If you think you know anything about Timmothy Pitzen's disappearance or whereabouts, you can contact the Aurora Police Department at 630-256-5000. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see more true crime content from me, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'll see you next time. Stay safe, everybody.